this with all the love in the world. If those images bothered you, or if the idea of a human injuring themselves bothers you, or if the idea of the episiotomy, by the way, for those of you who don't know what the episiotomy is, that's the medical term for cutting the baby out in that region. If you're not comfortable with those ideas, but you're sitting in this classroom and you're like, I am pre-med, no, you're not. I just want to break it to you right now. You don't make it through medical school if you're squeamish about those things.
Wait, what, like, is it worse? Does it?
No,
medical school worse than that?
No, like,
it's better.
what would be worse?
They literally shove so much at it.
You don't want me to Google the images of things that are worse than that.
Maybe I do.
It's not safe.
I need it. I need it young. No, wait.
No,
Um,
here we go.
The other thing I don't like seeing when people like
You're good?
break their arms detail so
That's
much.
the one where.
Yeah,
So-
gross.
Yeah, you don't. I want to dissuade any of you who are squeamish about those things right now. Think of another career path. Histology. There's good money in it, right? There's all kinds of things you can do in medicine that you don't have to see really gross stuff. So, it's your friendly public service announcement about your career choices. Those who are squeamish. So we said all of this stuff is really interesting, right? Like these are all just the diseases on this chromosome. Now think about all the things that aren't diseases on this chromosome. So every single one of your chromosomes is chock full of all kinds of recipes for all kinds of proteins. And the father of genetics didn't know any of this. He didn't know that there were chromosomes. He didn't know how they were inherited. For those of you, how many of you are familiar with Gregor Mendel? Okay, for those of you who are not, Cliff's Notes version. Gregor Mendel is the father of modern genetics, or actually the father of genetics. He was a monk, lived a monastic life. If you don't know how life in the monastery works, I'll sum it up for you pretty simply. Monks take a vow of poverty. That means that they're not allowed to earn money for profit. They can only have exactly what they need to get by. And that means if you live in a monastic community, the monastic community cannot earn money. All they can simply do is earn enough money to support their needs. They don't bank it. They don't have fat cash. And in order to earn a living, they produce things. That's why some monks sell beer and cheese or soap. They make things to sell to the public. If they don't sell them to the public, sometimes they make things that they can barter with. And they'll go into town and barter with the butcher. They'll say, well, here's a case of our wine if we can have one of your pigs. And they barter. Or they grow their own food. That's another method of being able to feed yourself. And in a monastic community, your rector gets to know you and gets to know your strengths and your weaknesses and assigns you to a job in the house based on your strengths or weaknesses. And Gregor Mendel, his rector, met with him, talked to him, and realized that he was a scientist, he was a biologist, and a good place for a biologist is probably in the garden growing food. And the food you would grow, yes, you're going to grow carrots and you're going to grow apples. There are orchards, and obviously there are vineyards with grapes because they make wine. They grow all those things. That's good and everything, but you need food that's going to last you in the winter months. So like tomatoes aren't going to cut it. This is 1880s. So he grew peas and beans, because those you can dry out and keep over winter, and you can eat them, and they'll feed a lot of people. They stretch, they go pretty far. If you're ever, on a short budget and you're at the grocery store, buy bags of beans. It's the best way to stretch $1. Don't like Gwyneth Paltrow it and buy like 30 limes and a bunch of cilantro. Did you guys see that? Have any of you know what I'm talking about?
Wait, what?
Wait.
Wait, is it on
So, there's this challenge where you live a week on the amount of money somebody on food stamps would get. And so Gwyneth Paltrow took this challenge because she's that good of a person. She's going to prove she can live on, or see what it's like to be somebody who's on food stamps. And she went to the grocery store and she bought like a bunch of cilantro and like 7 limes and an avocado and used her entire food budget on that. What are you going to feed yourself, your husband, and those oddly named children if all you have is a bunch of cilantro, 7 limes, and an avocado. You're gonna eat that for a week.
You're eating healthy.
I can make enough
For a
for
week?
sandwich, boy.
That will last a day. That will make 1 batch of guacamole, and then what? After you guys fist fight over the last tortilla chip, then what?
Wait, but they don't have to
All I
change
do is
it.
the lines.
You put the limes
All I do
in
is-
the guacamole.
Or
Juice the
you
limes.
take the lime
Juice them.
seeds out and you plant them.
Nice, nice.
You're gonna get a lime plant.
If any of you have to go to the grocery store on a budget, these are not the people to take with you.
Let me just plant a lime tree.
I want you to not take your lesson from Gwyneth Paltrow, but instead take your lesson from Gregor Mendel. Dried peas and dried beans, 1 bag of those can feed a family of 4 for like 3 days. That's good at 79 cents a bag. You stretch $1. Important life lessons. Don't become doctors and stretch $1. See? Got your back today. So Gregor Mendel was growing these peas, and he looked at them and he noticed something, because he was not a slouch, remember, we said he was a biologist. He's actually a professor at the University of Vienna, outside of the monastery. He also taught. And he noticed that peas came in 2 traits, or 2 different, multiple traits with only 2 versions. So for example, they were either tall plants or they were short plants. There were no medium plants. They were either yellow or they were green, but they weren't like a mixture of yellow and green. They were either fat pods, so the pea pod itself was chubby, or they were constricted, so you could see the pea inside the pod. Or, if I am the pea main stem and these are my branches, I made flowers at my fingertips, or you would make flowers where the main stem meets the branches. They call it axial budding, which would essentially be like at the armpit of that. So he noticed all of these traits were either ors. There was never a plant that combined them, that mixed them, that mushed them together. And again, biologists, he knew that they were what we call self-pollinators. That means that the pea plant flower is shaped in such a way that they don't need bees, they don't need birds, they don't need any of that. They're able to fold back and pollinate themselves, which means that all of their offspring are going to be genetically identical to them, right? If you're self-pollinators, what happens? Now, of course, Gregor Mendel didn't say genetically identical because the word gene hadn't been invented yet. He did what only a man of God could do. That's how you know he's a man of God. He took a short pea plant, and he took a tall pea plant, and he took a paintbrush. And he hand-pollinated every flower from the tall one to the short one, from the short one to the tall one. Every flower on every plant. If every one of those was a Hail Mary, he would have been out there for an eternity. A rosary is long enough. Like that is. Even more man of God, he waited for those flowers to turn into peas, right? He waited for the fruiting body. Then he collected all the data. But as far as height goes, collecting the data wouldn't be good enough at that point. He had to collect the peas, dry them out, and then plant them in the next growing season to see whether it would be a tall or short pea plant. Man of God. It's a lot of patience. And he discovered something strange. Even when he bred a tall plant with a short plant, all the offspring were tall. Now this is where you could interpret it as he gave up. He allowed all of those tall offspring to self-fertilize. Then he saved those pea pods, dried them out, and planted them in the successive growing season, and discovered 75% of them were tall and 25% of them were short. Now at this point he's thinking that's peculiar, but he's a statistician because he's a biologist, and all biologists are pretty good at statistics. And in that, he looked at it and he's like, I think I can explain this. I think I can explain it, and I'm going to call them character. Every single plant or animal has a character it inherits from a parent. And that character makes a trait. So in the tall pea plants, they only had tall character to give, so all of their offspring would be tall. And in the short pea plants, they only had short character to give, so all of their offspring would be short. And when he blended a tall parent with a short parent, it got one character from tall, one character from short, but the tall character must be stronger than the short character. So that's why you didn't see it in the first filial. First filial Latin students, what? And then is when he took the first filial and he let them self-pollinate to make the second filial. So he's the guy who allowed us to do one of these. And he called his characters exactly as we would, the capital and the lowercase letters. And he said, okay, my parental generation, the tall parent only had tall character to give. And the short parent only had short character to give. And when you blend them together, you end up with offspring that all have one tall character and one short character. But tall character is stronger, so all we see is tall character. Now, again, it's not Mendel's fault we didn't have the word gene. He's the guy who developed dominant and recessive. So we call this branch of genetics Mendelian genetics. Anytime we have something that's dominant and recessive and there are only two potential alleles, that's Mendelian genetics. And he counted a genotype ratio and a phenotype ratio. Genotype is what two alleles an organism possesses. So what two genes it actually has. In this instance, the two genes that all of the offspring have are capital T, lowercase t. And it's a ratio, so he said 4 of 4 are capital T, lowercase t. Another name for having one of each allele is heterozygous. So we have heterozygous genotypes here. This parent was homozygous dominant, and this parent was homozygous recessive. We have homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive. Then, so these are the parental generation we call P. This is the first filial. Mind you, the first filial does not tell us what all of the offspring are going to be. Box number 1 does not mean that offspring number 1 corresponds to what that child will be. Just simply says the probabilities of the trait your child will have. So the probability of the first filial here, all of them are going to be that combination. Phenotype is what you see. So it is the trait when you look at the organism, it is the trait that is expressed or the trait that is visible. The trait that is expressed or the trait that is visible. Here, it so happens that the phenotype is tall, right? All of those offspring are going to be tall. And it turns out, when we say all, we simply say 100% tall is our phenotype ratio. 100% tall. Make the second filial cross with your partner. Filial means take the offspring from the first filial and cross them. What was the genotype of my offspring in the first filial? 100% what? That's my phenotype. What's my genotype? 4 of 4. So there's one parental genotype. Here's the other parental genotype. How many of you are like, yes, I agree with what you have written? It turns out that's exactly what Mendel saw, so he had an explanation for his observations. So he went ahead and he published the explanation for his observations. He said that there are these characters inside of every organism. They pass them down You get one from each parent. He said all this stuff, and he was roundly rejected by the scientific community. They laughed at him. They were like, that doesn't make any sense. So poor Gregor Mendel actually stopped his scientific investigations, became rector of the monastery. So rector is essentially like house mom. And that's what he did for the rest of his career because he had been so soundly defeated by the outside world. It wasn't until probably a good 30 to 40 years later that people were like, hey, that Mendel guy had a clue. And thus, Mendelian genetics was born. Unfortunately, Gregor Mendel was not born. He was dead by then. But thankfully, man of God, he was probably okay with it. Okay with people rejecting him. No? Yeah, but he was a holy man. Doesn't that mean he's got to be patient and forgiving and stuff? No. Are you sure? How about now?
Well, I mean, all right, yes. No, but like, yeah, all right, yeah.
I'm waiting to be,
I guess.
you guess.
And
Go- Have you met a holy man or woman who's not been like more patient than another human being?
no.
Hey, just try to do.
Hey, Rob, I don't need your picture. Wait, is that how you say it? It's like when
What?
someone.
Oh,
Patriotism?
patronizing?
Yeah.
So are you trying to like tell me I'm good to America?
No.
Like this. He's like, hey, I'm going to take a tall plant and a tall plant that's a heterozygote. But tall's not good enough. I don't care about just a tall heterozygote. Any fool can make that Punnett square. I want to look at one that's heterozygous in two different traits. So I'm going to look at a tall, yellow pea plant. And I'm going to cross it with another tall, yellow pea plant. Because I'm Gregor Mendel and I can. You probably didn't say that part. If I were all these famous dead people, I would have said all kinds of fantastic things. How many gametes does that first parent make? How many potential combinations of alleles are there? There's 4 different alleles, right? A capital T and a lowercase t, a capital Y and a lowercase y. They're going to make 16 potential offspring. They'll make 4 potential gametes. Here's how. Capital T can make a gamete with capital Y. Agreed? Capital T could also potentially make a gamete with lowercase y. Lowercase t could make a gamete with uppercase y. Oops, that's an uppercase T. And lowercase t could make a gamete with lowercase y. Those are the 4 we just FOIL, right? So those are the 4 different possibilities of gametes made by that one parent. You get 1 from the first trait and 1 from the second trait, but you could get the first one and it could pair with the first allele of the second trait. So you see how my arrows follow there? Those are the 4 potential gametes that parent makes. The parent next to it makes the same 4 potential gametes. There are 16 potential offspring that could arise from this combination. I'll show you how to do the first box. It's the obvious box. We collect like terms when we do this. So capital T, if it were fertilized by a capital T, would make capital T, capital T, capital Y, because those are the only the only potential alleles those gametes bring. The box below that would be a capital T, capital Y, lowercase y.
Good afternoon, DC.